let me try to set a context for those of you who aren't here regularly, and also to begin to introduce our guests, who are very special guests who are here today. Every couple of weeks at the Annenberg School, we have the so-called Dean's Forum, in which we've been doing this for more than 3 years. It started off talking about the war in Iraq, even before the war actually, and then it moved to topics of politics and many other things. The goal of these meetings really is to get faculty and students to talk together across the units of journalism and communication, and also to get staff and others throughout the university to feel that they are invited to be part of these discussions. The purpose is never to say, is a policy right or is it wrong? The purpose of this is to see how the media covers things. How differently do we understand things? Are things being well communicated? In other words, it's about the subjects that a communication and journalism school deal with. So, and part of what made our discussions of the events leading up to the war and then whatever you call the period in the last 3 years, one of the things that made that so interesting was that many of the members of our faculty and many of the members of our student body here at the school come from other parts of the world in which they continue to watch the news in German or in French or in Japanese or in Korean. They're reading those papers online often, or reading them in their text version, or they're watching newscasts from those parts of the world, so that we see how the whole world is seeing things differently. And we realized as we were doing this that all around the world people are seeing things in different ways. The same events being presented in different ways. Today's discussion is unusual and I think quite exciting because we have a remarkable group of guests with us today. We happen to have, as we always somehow do, some guests who might have been at one of these Dean's Forums anyway, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But this is the first time we will have had a Dean's Forum, first time there could have been such a thing, with the Edward R. Murrow Fellows. There are 43 of these fellows, and I think we've distributed to you, you should have in your place, a list of them by country and publication. A remarkable group of journalists from around the world. About a third of them are from Africa, about a third of you are from East Asia, about a third of you are from South Asia. At the same time that this group is at USC, other groups are at 6 other journalism schools. So it's a very exciting program, we think, that we've helped to launch, and we've done it in partnership with the State Department. Nan Bell, who's a longtime government employee who's run international exchanges for a long time. When we were together at the USIA at one time, these programs we realized have been going back, not that Nan has, but the programs have been going back for 60 years, that there have been journalists coming to the United States. But for all of those 60 years, this is the first time that there's been a program like this, where there's a week of training as part of the program at a journalism school. So I want to particularly recognize and have be the centerpiece of today's discussion, the Edward R. Murrow Fellows. And I wonder if I could start so that people know who you are, although you're not going to be able to, if we had you each introduce yourself, that would take the entire time. I wonder if I could ask you all to stand so that we could recognize you all. Could the Edward R. Murrow. It's wonderful to have you all here. And a part of this program always is that we want to learn from you just as we hope that you'll learn something from us. It's a true exchange, and we think this is a great opportunity for our students and faculty, as well as we hope a fascinating opportunity for you. We do always have some other guests who happen to stop in. Somebody who's hardly a guest, but is a member of the family on extended leave, is Cindy Kennard, who runs National Public Radio. She's brought with her her colleague and maybe employer, if you call it that, senior executive of National Public Radio, Ken Stern. Ken, thank you so much for being here. And actually, Ken worked in international broadcasting at one point in his life. We happen to have here also Richard Robbins. Richard, where are you sitting? Richard Robbins, who, for those of you who ever watched the Peter Jennings documentaries or the Peter Jennings ABC News, Richard Robbins was responsible for writing and producing many of the best of them, including one great long documentary about the LAPD, another on Afghanistan, and he's been around the world with Peter Jennings. So Richard, it's great to have you here today. And we also have one of our alums who's back here today, just happens to be here today, who is an Africa reporter for Voice of America, but has spent the last how many years in Iraq?
3 years.
3 years in Iraq. Alicia is back here today, so thank you for being here today. So it's a great, she remembers Felix as a professor.
Felix, Murray.
Murray, many of our professors here. So what I thought I would start out with is by asking a question, and particularly I'd like our international guests to talk about this, and then I want to get as many people as possible into this discussion. And I want to know where in your countries you get news about the United States and what images you get of the United States or are transmitted in your countries. And of course it'll be different from country to country, we recognize that. And also I'm interested in how you feel that your country is presented, to the extent you know, on the American media. I ask this partly because the French ambassador was with us earlier this week, the ambassador of the United States in France, and he talked about how the news about France is so skewed that what we see are the difficulties in France. But of course, that's true. Practically every group has that view that it isn't always the good news that's presented, it's the difficulties that are presented. But I'd love to know and ask people to, by the way, this is being taped, so if you think you're going to say anything which might get you in trouble at home, don't say it or wear a hood over your face. But otherwise, if you can identify yourself and say what you feel either about how the United States is portrayed, what you're learning about the United States in your countries and from what media, or about how you feel your country is portrayed in the United States, that'd be terrific. Could I have some? Yes, please. And if you could sort of identify, by the way, don't we have, Jeff, some mics for people? We have one on this side, and there should be one on this side. There should be two. I can
speak loud enough.
I know, but I think it because there are people in the back, and we appreciate the fact that some people are standing there. Thank you.
My name is Sabir Shah. I come from Pakistan. I'm a Lahore-based journalist with country's largest English newspaper, which is Daily The News International. Although I'm not adept in English language as you are, but I'll try to explain how the U.S. people or the United States is projected. Since 47 it was all Britain. Till 47 it was all Britain. And soon after the era of new colonialism started, it was all America. And since 65, a sense of hatred started developing among the Pakistanis after they thought America did not help them in their Pakistan's war against India. It continued, and then came the Soviet invasion into Afghanistan. Then came the Kalashnikov and heroin culture into Pakistan. And people thought that, well, people may be illiterate, but they're not unaware, let me tell you. Even a man in the street knows where New York is. A man who has not gone to the school thinks whatever is happening around the world, America is responsible for it.
Good or bad?
Good or bad, whatever. I mean, this is the truth. Since we are here at a university where everything should be taken into account, that is the image somehow. Then, of course, the 9/11. And then, of course, 9/11 proved somehow a blessing in disguise for Pakistan for a time being, in the sense that a lot of affluent Pakistanis settled in America and Europe. They started sending their money back home. There was a boom in the real estate, and a lot of money came into the country because people who were there were afraid of racism and all. So they started sending a few of their proceeds back home. Anyhow, then you attacked Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, not only was the government unhappy over that, but Pakistanis also were unhappy over that. And when I say this, I'm not saying that people were ignorant of your sadness over the 9/11 thing. But somehow or the other, America is beginning to improve its image through public diplomacy. And there is a common feeling that whichever government comes into Pakistan, it's an American hand involved in that. And yes, it is true in the sense that no government wishes to annoy America. It does not mean that we are stooges or somehow, but power is a power, and power has its own dynamics. So soon after America succeeded in sending the Russian troops back, systems started getting a little better, somehow or the other. But there is no love, to be honest with you, in the Pakistani society for America, but the hatred is dying down. The government is making a lot of efforts. The educated class is making a lot of efforts by pushing the people whom you commonly dub as Taliban back to the mountains.
And how do you think Pakistan is presented in the American media, to the extent you've seen it?
Well, we get CNN daily, and we get this Fox News daily, and we get all these CNBCs and all. And yes, we get excerpts from the Voice of America in newspapers. Anything coming into American media is like a Bible for even for the Pakistani media to pick up. And to be honest with you, I mean, yes, it has a great impact. And now Pakistan's largest private sector channel, Geo Television, which is in Urdu, I work for the same group, which is the largest media group in Pakistan. Geo is being widely watched in Pakistan. And they have, Voice of America perhaps has bought a couple of hours on the television on prime time. And my father in the morning was telling me that I also wish to see United States in very near future because of the images Voice of America is projecting through the Geo Television.
Okay, let me see if I could get, by the way, is national, how many of you of the 43 international journalists who are here listen in your countries to National Public Radio, to America's National Public Radio? Ken, we've got work to do.
We got, well, no, they're
Okay, so could I ask if there's one of the journalists from Africa who might like to talk about how you see America and how you learn about America in your countries and how you think we perceive Africa? Any one of the Africans, please. And I think we have a microphone coming to you. Is it working, Jeff?
I'm Edris Chibundu from Uganda. I work for the Weekly Observer newspaper. I'm a staff writer. Well, when you see, when the way America is projected in my country in terms of the news that we receive through the public radio, we see an image of a country that is technologically developed, a country that is democratic, a country that has a free press, but also on the other hand, we see a country that is aggressive in its foreign policy. For example, in Uganda, ever since America attacked Iraq, we have a section of Ugandans, many of them, who feel that probably, if you look at the steps America took to attack Iraq, ignoring the UN resolutions, we have sections of Ugandans who think that America has overstepped its limits. So, in a sense, America is projected differently. We have two ways in which America is presented. On one hand, we see it as a big bully. I mean, that happens. And in another sense, we see it as a developed, a democratic country. Democratic country. And I think also that is helped by the fact that when you listen to public radio, for example, as we listen to Voice of America, and when you see some of these cable news network, when you use cable TV like CNN, you know, even them I don't think they really help Africa understand America's problems. What also they project is they try to project something that fits into the image of Africans about America. Where do we see, maybe with the exception of the recent immigration strikes and recently, but where do you see America projected as where you see there maybe poor, very poor people? I saw that in Washington. When we were in Washington about 3 days ago, you could see these people who are not very much similar to what we have, people who live on the streets who depend on handouts from government. But we rarely see that kind of image back home on our. So what I can say is that, briefly, is that when you look in our country, in my country, Uganda, America is projected in two ways. We have the good side of it, and then and then we have the bad side, which is not the way Americans project it, so, but what we have come to learn of the other part of America. Thanks very much.
Nick Cull, who runs our master's program in public diplomacy, which we've just started, said that one of the most interesting questions to ask is what surprised you? And it sounds like one of the things that has surprised you already is to see poverty, the poverty in this country. There are 92,000 homeless people in Los Angeles County. That might not be something you would have read about.
Including 10,000 children.
Including, at least I would say, 10,000 children. What about how America portrays Uganda or Africa? What's the image that you think we have of your society here? Do you have a sense of that?
The sad thing is that the only time, most of the times Uganda has got into spotlight in the American media, it has always had to do with the, for example, I remember when Idi Amin died, the former dictator, and you could see some images on CNN. Then once in a while, when there are some big events like the recent presidential elections, but again, it's a small bit. It's a passing item in the news. If you're not very attentive, you can miss it. Largely, I could say that Uganda is not projected very widely. I think, for example, we have had this transition to multi-party democracy, which I think that the American media maybe hasn't covered widely. Well, that depends probably. They don't think it's that very much important, or whether Uganda matters so much. Well,
It's not specifically about Uganda, but for anybody who hasn't read the current issue of Newsweek, it has a very interesting story about a number of Liberia and Rwanda and a number of countries that have had very exciting things going on in it. Did you want to get into this, lesson? And did you have reported from Africa also for Voice of America?
Yeah, I was in Kampala. I covered the elections during the elections from the 17th.
If you look this way, you'll talk to this.
Well, it's basically, I totally agree with you. I mean, we're very, very focused on very limited things in Africa. I think that's not so much that we don't want to, show the good parts of what Uganda's doing or Kenya's doing or Tanzania's doing or that kind of thing. We're just very short on resources to send people out. It's just me covering 14 African countries plus Iraq. And so, I just can't get to all these places. And we have drought, as you know. Ethiopia's got serious problems with Eritrea. And Kenya's got, problems with the Kibaki and, the corruption. I mean, there's so many things that are happening that sort of take priority. And I have to apologize if I haven't really gotten around to the good news of Uganda, because let me tell you, I was in Kampala back in the early 90s, and then I went back in sort of mid 90s, and then I went back again and again. Each time I went back, Kampala has actually become much. I mean, I'm amazed at what Kampala looks like these days compared to what it used to be, and so
maybe I think that has statements in a way highlight, I think, some of the reasons why I believe many foreign journalists, I think, that failed to come to grasp with what some of the problems in the developing countries like Uganda are. Because to a foreign journalist who was in Uganda maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when you come back now, you tend to think that because of, development in infrastructure and a few things, you tend to think that probably everything is okay. But again, right now when you look at Uganda, we have the underlying problem of, democracy. Many people think that the leadership probably is off track now than it was probably 15 years ago. And such questions I've said matter most. It's not a question of whether each and every other day a new shopping mall comes up, but it's a question of where we are headed politically, and it's very fundamental. I think one thing I've realized about foreign correspondents in our country is many of them are what you call desk journalists. When they come, they concentrate in one place. We have, maybe it's because of lack of resources, but again, they want to report on an issue, but many of them don't venture out really deep. They sit in their offices with laptops, and then sometimes when you see the image they project, I don't think that's a true picture. They don't dig deep. Many of them may even depend on the news in the local publications, and then also we have the problem of plagiarism. Probably, let me share with you one experience. My publication, the Weekly Observer, last year.
You're talking about blogs?
No, it's a newspaper. It's a print.
He's talking about plagiarism.
Plagiarism, I'm sorry.
Yes, plagiarism.
I'm sorry.
Last year, we ran something about the Ugandan government spending 1.2 billion shillings to improve its image. This was a big story which was captured by even foreign networks and foreign media. But what happened that we broke the story. So the next day we logged on to the Reuters website. I mean, they ran the whole thing without acknowledging. And our bosses were so insistent, they had to write emails because as we can't write something, we can't write a story without acknowledging. It was all over Reuters, AP, and
Reuters plagiarized your story.
Yes, of course that's something that has been settled now.
That's fascinating.
But then you find that there are correspondents. That's what they call desk journalism. Many foreign, they concentrate in cities and they want to report about far wider-reaching issues like drought, which is in the rural areas. But they report on it with the kind of authority that, to someone who's not there, for example, to people like you who read the news from your correspondence from our countries, you kind of get the idea that this is expertise information, and that's where I have the problem.
In a minute, I want to ask Ken to talk about how NPR covers these issues, and then I really want to make this be a free-for-all, but I'd like to get an East Asian person. Is there a person from East Asia who can speak about how you feel your country is covered in the United States and how you think the United States is seen in East Asia? Could I get, please?
South Asia.
From, yeah, we have said sort of a South Asia. I'm just trying to get each of these three regions to speak. Is there an East Asian person who would speak about it? We have reporters from Hong Kong. Yes, please. Okay, thank you.
Hello, Achara from Bangkok Post. I'm from Thailand. I have 2 points to make. First, I agree with, I don't know, maybe American media, but in the past 10 years or maybe more than that, the wire services play a lot of role in Thailand, and I think it's also in Southeast Asian countries as well. For example, when we talk about perception in Africa, so what we have is like we perceive from what we read from the wide stories. And then newspaper print, translated those wide stories. So that's what we get. Now we have like more electronic media, CNN, CNBC, whatever, BBC. But second point is that, for example, CNN is kind of just only big issues that they would like to come to go for. For example, the election in Thailand now, the result of the new government, or maybe the big demonstrations about a free trade agreement between Thailand and the US, which is the most comprehensive one we're gonna get. And they so far have not gone quite deep, like what have been through before this huge demonstration takes place. They kind of just pick up this image, like these people are against FTA, but in fact there are reasons behind that. And
A lack of context.
Yeah. I mean, they should have explained more of like there are reasons. They are not just against liberalizations or free trade agreements. The third point, I'm sorry, I have to, but the third point is that maybe the domestic problem of our country is that the leaderships tends to look at or to look up to the major powers, Japan, China, US, you name it, especially American. So they kind of, if they have a message to talk, so they just prefer CNN and go on television like that, and So so that's the 3 points I would like to make.
And how do you feel that the United States is seen in Thailand?
U.S. is perceived by Thai people?
Yeah, but through your media. How are you reporting on the U.S.?
My paper?
Your paper and the other media.
In general. There are two things. First is U.S. politics. The second, actually, is politics as well. It's Hollywood. That's the culture is everywhere. So that's the perception we have. And one thing is good that I have to kind of applaud is that the critical comments that American press have, so we can also see bad sides or the negative points of the U.S. leadership as well.
National Public Radio has a listenership of about 20 million now? 26 million.
Who's counting?
It's really quite remarkable, and it's larger than just about any other news outlet, particularly in terms of reaching, let's say, opinion leaders in this country. Ken, how do you think about these issues, and how do you think about how National Public Radio covers the world?
I think it is an increasingly important part of American media's job to report about world events to the American public, because we are so much more interconnected and interrelated with the world, and you can't make decisions in our civil society about America's involvement in the world, in Iraq, in the Middle East, and Africa, without getting fact-based reporting from around the world. And I think American media is doing an increasingly bad job of reporting from around the world. And that's simply for a very specific reason. It's really expensive, as many of you who are in journalism know, to cover the world. CBS News, not to pick on them, but I will, used to have about 18 foreign bureaus. I think they're down to 2. And that is, I think, simply a bellwether for American media. At NPR, I think we've tried to fill some of the vacuum. It's one of the things we're proudest of is our expansion. We opened our first foreign bureau. Robert Siegel, who some of you may know as host of All Things Considered, was actually our first foreign correspondent in London at Bush House at the BBC in 1982. We now have 17 foreign bureaus.
Thanks to John Frye.
Thanks to a whole series of things.
The widow of the man who started McDonald's hamburger chain gave $230 million to National Public Radio.
McDonald's image is bad in many parts of the world, but it's good at NPR. But even with the increase of our foreign coverage, I think we are strained to relate the facts of the world back to American audiences in ways that are really meaningful. To Alicia's story of covering Africa, one of the things we've done, we used to have 1 correspondent in Africa, we now have 3. But even with 3, you do what I call bang bang journalism. You follow events, you follow violence, you follow famine, you follow elections, and that gives you one, I think, very specific picture of what's going on, but doesn't give you a very well-rounded picture. I look at our reporters' futures list. It's a list that they send in an update about monthly of the stories they want to do. And they're a wonderful list. I've seen them from our Africa correspondents for a long time. They're a wonderful list. They really get into politics, they get into arts, they get into culture, they get into human stories. But they don't actually get to the futures list that often because they're too busy covering the events of the day. And I think that's a real weakness that we all face in media, even in media which has really invested a lot in foreign reporting.
I think it might be interesting also to hear how the American print media works. And Michael, I wonder if I could ask you to just step up here for a second. Michael Parks, who is the director of the journalism school, won a Pulitzer Prize for reporting from South Africa, was a great international journalist all around the world, and was the editor-in-chief of the Los Angeles Times. Michael, maybe you could give some observations about the role of the American press in covering the world. And then after Michael, I'm going to ask people to just get in and have this be a free-for-all.
Okay. Let's see if I can do it in 2 or 3 points. The first is, yes, we are guilty and obliged to follow the bang-bang, to follow the crises, to follow the disasters, the catastrophes, because American people need to know, and they want to know. That does mean that the wonderful stories that we want to do as journalists, we don't really get to as frequently as we should. And it's a question of resources, but it's also a question of reorganizing our time and reprioritizing, I think. I think there are ways around that. Second point is that as a correspondent for an American newspaper, and I was overseas for 25 years, I was mindful of my audience. My audience was not in Pakistan, although I might have been in Pakistan. My audience was in Baltimore or Los Angeles or subscribers to the news services that those papers fed. I was writing for an American audience. My job was to tell them what they needed to know, that they should know about the world out there. That's a different task than journalists in Pakistan or South Africa or China have. And it means it's a different story. So would my reporting from the war between India and Pakistan in 1971 have pleased Pakistanis? Probably not, but I wasn't writing for them, just for their censors. So that's the second point. And it's an obligation to persuade people to read or to watch, to listen to what they need to know and understand. And I think the third point I would make is the one I bang the table on here all the time is the global has become local and vice versa. What happens in, well, let's take Nigeria. Who's from Nigeria?
We have some Nigerians.
Nigeria? Okay. Okay, what's happening in Nigeria now matters to everybody who drives a car in Los Angeles, and that's like 110% of us. And how to explain that in ways that we care about what's happening in Nigeria and not just what's happening to our gasoline prices, which are now more than $3 a gallon for premium grade. Everything is now connected. And there needs to be a new so what paragraph in a story. So what? Why am I reading this? Why am I listening to this? There needs to be a new so what paragraph. And so to the students who hear this every week, I'm sorry, but I got a larger audience.
And professionals will go out and do it tomorrow. Okay, let me just open this up for anybody, faculty, student, and especially Murrow Fellows. Yes, please, in back. And wait, if you could, for the mic. Yeah.
I'm Khalid Muhyiddin. I'm from Bangladesh. Nice meeting you people.
Welcome.
I mean, the image of America in Bangladesh is like, in Bangladesh, almost everybody hates America. Almost everybody. But the other thing is, almost everybody wants to come to America as well. So I ask people, why you hate America like these things? No, America is kind of thing that always cast a red eye to us. They think the whole world is their own property. So why you want to go to America? They say America is less America in America itself. I mean, in the bigger cities and smaller towns as well. And otherwise, what America we perceive and see in our country is that America is like, it's the people's perception, of course. As a journalist, I always encounter people over there. It's like devil, demon, and always shouting like this, America will not seek permission slip from anyone to do anything. So there's a thing, the image of America in Bangladesh. And another
Can I
thing,
just ask, I mean, did that clip from the debate
yes,
get played around the world? America will not ask the world for permission slip. Is that something that resonates with a lot of you?
Of course, yes.
Interesting, yeah. So, because that, let me just say, for our school, that's not just a part of news or public diplomacy. It's also, as several of you have degrees in communication. Several of the, I've read your bios. Several of you have degrees in communication. That's about rhetoric. And it's a bit of rhetoric that has an impact in the world as well as having an impact directly. So forgive me for saying this, but when President Bush said that, he's thinking of a domestic audience. But something for which we're not always as mindful as I would like to see us be is that we also have an international audience. And so you're describing how the international audience sees it, whereas he was thinking politically how it plays with the domestic audience. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, from Bangladesh, we always see President Bush and Mrs. Rice and kind of people, not you, of course. I mean, that's the irony. That is why the people come here too, because it's lesser America here. My perception is that. And the another thing is United States is very important in our country. I mean, for politics, our leader of the opposition always tends to run to. We didn't have the ambassador for the last 1.5 years, but even the CDA charged the affairs that we had that problem. Please do this, please do that thing. I mean, they always complain to CDA, and the CDA is always in the paper, even not the ambassador, always in the front page. I'm not a regular diplomatic correspondent. For my makeshift assignment, I interviewed the ambassador Harry K. Thomas and participated in press conferences at least 20 times, and it's always in the front pages within 2 years. So this is the thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, this is Murray Frompson, who was a great CBS correspondent when they had bureaus around the world.
Okay.
And having been in Bangladesh and Pakistan and some of these other places as well. What's the population of Bangladesh today?
150 million, I guess, 140 millions.
How many newspapers and television stations?
Many newspapers, actually more than 100 daily.
So if I heard you right, you said everybody in Bangladesh hates America. Everybody
Almost.
wants to come to America. How do you know that? How do you
I said almost. I said almost because there are United States embassy in Bangladesh as
What
well.
does almost mean? No, I'm serious. I'm just trying to figure out how do you gauge public opinion in Bangladesh?
Because after you went to war against Iraq, there's a large procession. There were large procession for at least 30 days, 45 days, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months, maybe still is going on. In every week, if not in every week, every alternative week, in every alternative week, like it's a huge procession, I mean, against America. So we do not want America to be in Iraq, we do not want America to, and it's a common saying in Bangladesh that United States, the people doesn't need enemy who is friend of America. We're saying in Bangladesh now.
But Murray, to follow Murray's point in a different sense, I guess you were making that as a generalization or discussion. If you were reporting in the papers, you'd want to actually say there's a survey that says that X% feels such and such, because it's a generalization you're making, but surveys are also interesting in this regard. And do you know there's a Pew Global Attitude survey that asks what different countries think of the United States? And I can't remember what it says about Bangladesh, but I do remember that in India, not Bangladesh, obviously not the same thing, but there are people who are from India. America seems to be surprisingly popular today. Maybe because there's so much commerce.
India is different.
Yeah.
India is United States of America itself in South Asia. So it's different. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Is there somebody here from India? I'd like this.
In a way, we are, we try to act like the big brother, and they are very right. And just as the U.S. is hated in many parts by many people, India is also.
Is the volume?
Just as the way U.S. is hated in many parts of the world by many people, India is also, there are a lot of resentment in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, not Pakistan. Pakistan is rival. We claim Big Brother, but they don't accept us as Big Brother. that is there. Now, having said that, but let me know. I wanted to take this opportunity to come back to a very core point, and I guess all the young faces I see here are students of your school.
I hope so.
And
actually, you know what? Let me take that chance. Could the people who were students at the Annenberg schools stand so that people can get a sense of it? And other schools, other USC students who are here.
USC students.
USC students. So.
Okay, we have more than 2,000 future journalists and would be writing big papers, working for big broadcast corporation. And I wanted to take this opportunity to say something which I really is very core to me, very close to my heart.
and I've very closely tracked this happening over the last 5-6 years. Let me just go back and pick up the thread from what Jay Harris told us in the morning, that in today's globalized world, what any media does in any part of the world has consequences, the impact of which is two-way. I think nothing other than 9/11 demonstrated it more. And it just didn't affect you. It did affect us in a big way. Not what Osama bin Laden did, but what US did after that. That also. Until 2000 or 2001 in India, when you heard about terror attacks, they were mostly confined to Kashmir. We have had a spate of attacks which have happened all over the country after that. There is integral linkage in the way US responded to 9/11, and thereafter the governments in various countries tied along with the US action, the so-called global war on terror. And then let me pick up the second thread of what Jay Harris told us in the morning, that your country was perceived by your founders as a self-governing republic with a free press that would act as a sentinel. My only request would be, as you graduate from this school, try and do your best to do that job of the sentinel in being a true watchdog where you can guide your government to force changes in the foreign policies or restrain them from certain acts which are going to have impacts not running into years, but perhaps now I see them running into decades. And it has a bearing in all of us, you as well. The way you do it, the way we do it. And this is the feeling with which I come here, and I see what is happening. Right. And that probably answers, when you say how US is perceived, how we perceive US, where do we get news. If you ask about my country, we are in a bit of a honeymoon phase now. And just the way in the United States, majority of the vocal media or the influential media would at some point of line would be siding with the establishment or its views. Just the same way in India, the dominant vocal view that you would see, this is a honeymoon phase. Yeah, there are a lot of expectations from US. There are certain positive perceptions about US, but that's vocal middle class segment. There are certain changes.
Let me take your question, your comment also as a challenge and a question, because I think you're raising a very important point. What do we teach our students? What do we teach our students about their responsibility to challenge authority, to be willing to say things that are unpopular in this country, to take risks because there is a story that has to be told? This is part of what you're asking as a question, as well as saying to the students. And I wonder if any of the members of the faculty, maybe Michael, you want to speak to that. What is the responsibility? And you're speaking to not just the guests here, but the students. What do you teach as the responsibility of our students to do just what this gentleman has talked about?
I think you said it very well. That it is the responsibility of journalists to bring to light the information that our self-governing people need. Often that is unpopular. Sometimes it is just factual. What is happening. Sometimes it may be challenging. You've said this, but the reality is this. It is absolutely our responsibility. And it comes under that obligation to persuade people to read and understand what they need to know.
But Michael, let me just pursue and maybe ask a question you won't be asked. But in asking it, I want to encourage you to feel free to ask these questions of people here. You were the editor of one of America's 3, 4, 5 best newspapers. Certainly while you were the editor, it was that. And
thank you.
And you follow closely what happens in the major American media. I'm not talking about blogs. I'm not talking about opinion magazines. Major American media. To what extent are they intimidated by government or by popular opinion, and to what extent do they wind up avoiding those stories which maybe speak what is sometimes called speaking truth to power?
I think it happens more often than we would like to acknowledge. I think that particularly in the Washington environment, that journalists are co-opted by the sources of news, sources of information. They want to be part of the power game. And I think this happens in probably each of your countries too. You want to be part. You want to be on the inside. And I think it is absolutely corrosive of good journalism to let yourself be co-opted that way. You begin to see yourself as part of the government, part of the establishment. And it happens in covering city councils. It happens just across the board. And so how do you guard against that? How do you, on the one hand, get access to the information, but on the other hand, do not become part of the power structure? You have to say no more often than you say yes. And no is to being part of something. I see it, you cover it Hollywood. The people who cover Hollywood think they're part of Hollywood. And who does that serve?
Murray, did you want to? You got to either get a mic or speak toward the.
There's one right on the table.
There's Murray.
Murray,
This one.
Murray?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's fine.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I once worked for the AP and worked in India, but permanently, but I was in and out of India from other places. Raj Kamal is a graduate of this school. He's the editor of one of the largest papers in India, the Express. Raj Kamal. How does the Express cover India? Cover the United States? Do you know? Do you know whether the newspaper, that newspaper, with a wonderful editor who was a wonderful student here, do you understand whether he influences the way in which the United States is portrayed?
Well, I doubt it. Let me just sort of tell you how India turned it on. You see, India has a very vibrant and we have a very large media industry. CNN in television, no American newspapers are not there. They're just few copies for officials and other top business people. There are a couple of Financial Times and Wall Street Journal probably sell more than IHT, New York Times, and Washington Post. Radio, Voice of America, there are many people hear that, but BBC is more, probably would have a bigger coverage. We have a huge media industry, and which rely largely on wire services and television feeds by agencies, and some of them have also tie-ups with respective television like ABC, CBS, and they take the feed from there to cover US. So there's, most Indians learn about US through their from their own from Indian television channels or Indian newspapers, but definitely the news comes from wire services or some of the American broadcast companies.
I want to move this on.
Now Express, you're talking about, well, they don't, well, it's a good paper, but it's a small paper, doesn't have much influence on the government's public policy, and I don't think Raj Kamal would have much of a say. I mean, he's one of the editors. There are many editors.
You two, and Murray, you can talk about this later. Let's move on, because I want to let's others get into this. I appreciate this.
There is any broader question.
No, I think your question. You two can talk more about Raj and about India later. I want to get some of the African journalists into this, please, and also to make this announcement to people. We usually end these sessions at 1, but we're going to extend this one to 1:30. So for people, students or faculty or staff who have to get to actual jobs or courses, you'll all be forgiven if you leave, but we'll keep this conversation going until about, and there, hopefully there'll be time for all of you to get in. Yes, please.
Good day, my name is...
This is working.
I'm Sadia Fakir from South Africa, and I want to say that, a lot of these, how America is perceived in our countries. And can I just say maybe that we have sort of 3 positions. How the US was perceived before 1994. In other words, were you for the apartheid government or were you for the anti-apartheid movement? Now, of course, There is a perception in South Africa that most of our support, especially the moral support for the anti-apartheid movement, came largely from Europe and the UK. Just one perception. I'm not saying that there was no support, but just one way of looking at how South Africans see the US. Post 94, you know, we have our own challenges. So it's who is supporting the new democracy, who is in a very moral way or moral support, financial support, and those issues. But then, of course, there's the post 9/11 perceptions of the states, and South Africans. I think in South Africa we're all generally very suspicious of our own government, you know, because that's government. You have to be suspicious. If you're not, they're just going to do what they want to do. But we don't have as vibrant a press that the United States has with its suspicions of government. So we see the US as, you know, wanting to maybe dominate the world agenda. In the area where I work, and that is community radio, and we broadcast to a Muslim audience largely. And here's the difficulty. The difficulty is that our audience, which is South African Muslims across the spectrum, like to hear what is happening in the Middle East. They want to know what is happening in the Muslim world. As journalists, as one-time station manager, as a presenter of current affairs, I don't think that's healthy. I think we should talk about what's happening, get expert opinion on what's happening. But you know, we have an agenda in South Africa, or we have an imperative in South Africa that means we need to transform our society from a divided society to a more integrated society, to a society where people can reap the benefits of democracy and freedom, such as economic benefits, social freedom, and those issues. So at the end of the day, you know, we make the kind of decisions that says, you know, the US, we're not going to focus on that, even if all people want to hear about is the situation in Iraq. So let's give it a roundup once a week, the situation in Palestine, if there is new information. There are Muslims and people in other countries, in other parts of the world, that are facing the same dilemmas that we are. Being in Africa, Africa's got a number of emerging democracies, so we need to, you know, we need to help each other, we need to learn from each other. In the US, there's the issue of immigration, and it may seem like a negative thing, but it's also a positive thing, because in South Africa, we have those very same dilemmas, those very same issues. So what I'm trying to say is that as journalists, is not just to say that, look, these are the issues, that's our community, and that is what's happening. It's gathering news and going to look for news and making news and writing about news that is in the public interest at the end of the day.
Let me ask some other people to get into this, and as you do, Ken had a question which I'd like you to maybe thread into your questions or comments, and that is, yeah, okay, but let me just have this question added to whatever you all say, and then what I want to do is we'll pass the mic around to you as quickly as we can, and maybe people can make relatively short comments or questions, but we're still getting a lot of you in. But Ken, your question you want to add to it is what? We'll get to all of you.
In many of your comments, you mentioned access to a relatively narrow band of American media. You've mentioned CNN, Voice of America, maybe a few daily newspapers sprinkled around for the influentials. But has the internet, I'm curious whether the internet and access to more American media, has that affected your societies at all? Has it opened up America in different ways that are meaningful to you all?
So the impact of the internet, and if you put hands up, Vicky's walking around with mics, and we'll make sure that we get to as many of you as possible.
Trying to kind of mix up.
Yeah, okay, so right in back of you there's a...
He gets
Or-
another chance
oh, I'm sorry.
because he's been getting a lot of
Okay,
talk.
good. Okay, you get a chance in a minute. You get a chance in a minute.
I'll get you. I'll get you.
I'd just like to react to what he said about the lack of resources.
So, could you identify yourself too in the process?
I'm from India. I'm a broadcast journalist for a company called NGTV 24/7. When you say lack of resources, I could appreciate that because we also get accused of the same thing of not focusing on certain areas. For the last 5 years, I've been working on an area called Northeast India, which is kind of a little neglected part of India. And even in Indian media, we have not been able to focus really on our neighbors, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, to that extent. But I would be really surprised when American media says that they have lack of resources. Because, we've got something called a ticker, which is like a 1-inch scroll which runs across the television screen. And, these days, you would be getting a lot of feeds from agencies, from Reuters, AP, everything coming on. So even if you're not carrying a feature or not really covering a story, but mention of something which really is serious, really is global, I'm sure that can run as a scroll on on American television screens. And taking off from there, something which I actually accused Jay Harris this morning, I didn't get a satisfactory answer from him, is that the way we perceive American media is very America-centric. The way we thought Europe was Eurocentric till about the 50s or the 60s. And Indian media, because I'm not qualified to talk about what India perceives. I think it's a very vast country, a lot of opinions out there about America. But what Indian media feels about American media, non-serious hip-hop, I think BBC in that sense is held in much higher esteem to CNN or other American media.
We've done studies at this school comparing the quality and the news coverage in American media. And one of the things that we found is, and others have found something similar, is that there has been a clear trend toward celebrity, gossip, sensation, entertainment, and away from more serious coverage of news, whether that is the coverage of news that's international or whether it's coverage of domestic issues. You can find a definite trend of that kind.
Can I add just one thing to what you were saying? Being overseas for a very long time, and I'm wondering if it's true in India or I'm kind of very worried about this trend towards political polarization, which is you have channels like Fox, which has a very clear agenda, and they promote a specific idea. What I worry about is, do the international audiences, when they see Fox News, do they identify that as something that promotes a very right-wing Republican agenda, or do they say, wow, that's what all Americans must think, because this is American television? And I get accused all the time, oh, you're VOA, you must be a mouthpiece of the the U.S. government. I said, no, you have me confused with Fox News. I really have to tell them, excuse me, this is, you have to make a distinction here. And you have to understand that there are people with agendas and people who are trying to be neutral, and who, and please make that distinction, and don't lump all American media into one homogenous group, because we're not. And we're certainly trying our best, those of us who still are in the old school, trying to keep that neutrality. But
okay, we have people back here. We've got an order here. I'm gonna let Vicki be in charge of getting the mic to people when most people will talk. Okay? Yeah. Whoever has the mic gets to talk.
You're next.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. You're next. And then you're next. Okay.
My name is Maysoon. I'm from.
Please don't turn the switches on the bottom. Turn them on control.
My name is Maysoon, and I'm from Sudan. And I think my country has surfaced in the American media for the past few months. Disappeared now, I don't know what. Actually part of my country, which is Darfur. And as journalists, most of us wonder why Darfur is of much interest, more than the war in the south, which was a civil war. Your comment about Nigeria and interest, that's what makes American media alarming to my country. Is the question would be, which would rise, is what kind of interest does America have in Darfur that it is now in the American media? And the thing is, actually, because the kind of how media handles issues abroad is actually a bit superficial, or let's say just really fast and commentary, and as I said, not analytical. The thing is, what I wanted to say was that although, for example, the American media might say that in Darfur there is genocide, BBC says the same thing. For example, Monte Carlo would say the same thing. It is accepted from BBC and Monte Carlo, but not accepted from the United States because there is no follow-up, for example, as the BBC does on what happens in Darfur. There is no analysis on what happens. It seems quick. And because what happened in Iraq, for example, that it was in the media first and then came the invasion or the occupation in Iraq, the alarm is the same, that it starts as comments in Darfur and then the same thing happens, occupation. So there is no in-depth analysis in how the media deals with the issues abroad.
My name is Getsmani from Times of Zambia. That's Zambia, Southern Africa. About how America is perceived in my country. Well, America is perceived to be this country with a great gift of compassion, because looking at its commitment in the issues of HIV/AIDS, as you know that Southern Africa is highly affected with the issue of HIV/AIDS. So, like American government has made a lot of commitments in my country, Zambia, to fight the pandemic in the issue of education, prevention, and sensitization. And it's doing a lot in the areas of fighting child labor in my country, where this is one of the problems. Apart from that, we have a lot of American missionaries in Zambia who have built schools in rural areas. So people think that America is, well, it's a great country and it's this superpower, but at the same time, they have this mixed feeling about just how it has handled the issue of the war on terror, especially the issue of Iraq. So people have a lot of mixed feelings. Otherwise, looking at the way America is I think it's doing a great deal of work in my country, because fighting HIV/AIDS and the issues of child labor and just helping a lot of these other things. But otherwise, the image of America in my country, I would say it's quite good.
Hello, my name is Shakil Ahmed. I work for Asian Television Network and from Bangladesh. I have a small differ with my friend, Bangladeshi friend. What he was telling, that everybody in Bangladesh don't like or hate American, which is not perfect. I mean, not exactly the word should be. What I believe, 60% of the population of my country don't even know how to write their names. So most of the people in the country actually don't have any idea about the international, what's going on international and who is what. They have the opinion, they know as a Muslim about the Iraq or other Muslim issues, but not all the issues they know. And that means that I should say the perfect word should be the mistrust. They don't trust Americans. They don't, because from 1971, as he was telling, that from the war begins with Pakistan and Bangladesh, and this position took by American on that time was not in favor of Bangladesh. And from that time, and right now from Iraq, if a bomb blasts in any part of the country, then people thought, well, it might be some American people did it, because so that they want to come to Bangladesh with their soldiers to make control in South Asia. So these are the thoughts in the...
Can I just ask a question about this? You've made a point that's similar to the point for the woman from Sudan, which is that you hear something, you read something, you see it on the American media, or an event takes place in your country, and to you it could possibly be a precursor to an excuse for American occupation of some kind.
Yeah. And also, the news we got from American, we have every time we got mistrust, because like we use internet as a media person. We never trust the wares. We got the wares as a television journalist from the APTN or some other institutions. But we always check and balance. You know, whenever we make the news from the American, like maybe the Bush comments or the comments on Iraq, we always take we have to take 2-3 sources to make our story to be published. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Vicky's got next,
yeah, thank you.
Who's next, Vicky? Vicky, who's next?
Right over here, and then
So does he have the, oh yes, please, I'm sorry.
This is Kaustubh from India, working for a regional news channel. We are present in 10 states of India and at least have one person at the taluka level or at the county level, as you can call it over here. As it was said regarding the resources and the coverage outside India or regarding the neighbors, it's done very well by all the channels or all the newspapers that are present within the state. But apart from that, the Indian media that needs to cover is the rural part of India. The urban voices are broadcast everywhere and are represented everywhere. But what about the rural voices? The rural voices regarding America or America's views regarding India in the rural sector that are really not known to the rural people. As we go among the rural public of India, they really are not concerned regarding the views or regarding the expressions that US has made. They need to do or they need to go along with their own businesses and with their day-to-day lives and the day-to-day earnings. Whereas comparing the both the medias, when we see, Indian media has always given a positive or a balanced picture about the US, whereas the US media till recent, that is till a couple of years back, has always given a negative impact or a negative story about India. That is only recently that there are many positive stories, as many of the corporations from US are coming down to India. Also regarding the international news agencies or the news agencies like Bloomberg and the others that are from the US, they mostly cater to the tastes of the US corporations present in India or interested to invest in India. This is what is seen.
Thank you. I wonder, Vicki, as you go around, make a special effort to get the East Asian group in, because yeah. So who have you given the mic to?
I think I'm next because
oh, yes,
I have
please.
the mic.
Yes, that's who has it as the next person.
Yeah. My name's Josh. I'm from Afghanistan, and I work for I'm a senior editor for Kabul Weekly, which is the biggest newspaper in Afghanistan. Just to come to the question of how much people get in the media about the U.S. and what they think of it, you first have to look at Afghanistan's the people's outreach. I mean, to see how much they get from the media. Normally, because the Americans are in Afghanistan, every third news story you get from the media has to do something about the U.S. I mean, like the other countries, we're privileged because we have the U.S. Army in our country, so we have an abundant supply of news stories about the U.S. But at the same time, you have to look at how much the people have suffered and what have been the consequences. For 25 years, Afghanistan was in the middle of nowhere. Nobody cared. It was war, and I mean, personally, when I was a kid, I loved to watch CNN because I wanted to see what was happening in my country, and I couldn't see anything. I mean, the Taliban were in power. They were doing very bad things, and every once in a while there was a talk about, well, women wear burqas in Afghanistan, which is very bad. But what about the people who are getting killed? What about the refugees? Well, not a lot of talk about that. So now, the people in Afghanistan have this mentality. They have this idea, or how could I say, they've formed this, that they only care about what's good for them. Do we like the U.S.? Should we like the U.S.? Why? If it's in our national interest, if it helps us, we'll like it. What happens inside the U.S., we don't care. Should we like Pakistan? Is Pakistan a friend? No, we don't care. We care if it helps us. If it doesn't help us, we don't really want to go into it. And as far as the perception of, I mean, the things that happen inside the U.S., and I mean, there's nothing. I mean, personally, in my newspaper, 99% of our stories, when the word U.S. or say the word Americans, it's always mentioned in a story that's related to Afghanistan itself, totally. We don't go into anything that's, I'd say, anything of domestic affairs in the U.S. Like, if 100 people get killed in the U.S., well, I don't expect it to be covered that much in the Afghan media. How I see my own country in the U.S., just before I moved, I went to Pakistan to take the trip here. It was the last night, and my newspaper was coming out tomorrow. I was just looking at news. I needed 3 stories, just 3 stories about Afghanistan, domestic affairs. And I found 11 stories. A total of 60-something people had died in different provinces. But the problem was, when I was looking at the headlines in Yahoo News, from where I get most of my news stories about the world, I couldn't find a single story in the top stuff, nothing. I could see 3 GIs killed in Iraq, maybe 2 people here, 3 there. Afghanistan gets minimum coverage. I mean, this is from the Afghan media. We don't have any polls because we don't have that much money to conduct them. I can only tell you things that we see through our colleagues. We personally think we don't get much attention, but we're kind of forced because of the public opinion, because the public wants the U.S. The public wants the U.S. because it's helping us, so we kind of have to take care of them when we're wet.
Thank you. Who's next?
We'll go here, then we'll go here, then I'm going back over here, and
Okay,
then
so-
I think we'll be done.
All right, so who has the next?
Gentleman with
Please.
Mike.
Yes.
Yes, I'm Nyo Moses from Cameroon.
Yes.
I think our historical past and present do explain maybe the so much enthusiasm we have about America in my country, because we have 2 not colonized anyway legacies, the French and the English, British, and the tendency is that you find 2 different views towards America but leading to the same conclusion. You have the Anglophone community who think America is not doing so much or too much to liberate them from what they call maybe certain techniques of governance which are not quite correct. And then you have the French who think that America is that country which will come save them. And so you see the much interest of Cameroonians in American politics, which drives them into listening more to American radio stations and TV, VOA being a good example. But I think if you want to explain that tendency Cameroonians have towards America, the issue is that they see America like that big country which can liberate them from the whims and caprices of maybe what we now call the shackles of dictatorship, as it was at the time, not now anyway, because things are gradually improving in my country. Secondly, but equally important, it's important to note here that in the past 2 months, the American ambassador has been very much in the news in our country because there is an anti-corruption campaign, and all the different news organs saw in that campaign the direct involvement of America, in the sense that they think, rightly or wrongly so too, because no one has actually given us clear-cut information as to where the information comes from, that the American ambassador has been very instrumental in pushing government get involved in the anti-corruption campaign in the country, which has led to the dismissal and arrest of 1 minister and some 3 top-ranking state-owned corporation bosses. So on that basis, I think the American press in my country is quite present. The perception people have of the American policies in my country is positive, but something is too slow, or too slow. And if you want to explain that, you use the principles of use and gratifications that people tend to read or listen to media organs which go to reinforce their preconceived ideas, which comfort them. And they find comfort here in the American press when it comes to moving towards a more democratic and open society.
Thank you.
My name is Manto Pagati. I'm from Swaziland. The perception of the American, particularly the media in Swaziland, is that if if the Americans don't understand something about us as a nation, then it's wrong. I'll give you an example of the Ridge dance. which has been, reduced to some sort of, a pornographic, event. When in fact, the fact that it's a reed dance, it's where, young girls go and, collect the reed, to like sort of, paying homage to the king to build the royal residences. And then afterwards, we celebrate and then we wear different attires, where others, wear these micro, mini skirts to, just to celebrate and dance and, sing. But, from the American media, it's like that's, a way of young girls are being paraded in front of the king so that he chooses them. So, and another thing is that the issue of traditional, healing when it comes to HIV and AIDS. Where America hasn't put enough effort in terms of researching, putting more research into finding finding out how exactly traditional healings can assist in HIV and AIDS, but they sort of push the Western medicinal interventions and sort of ignore what is already existing in our country, and this has created a lot of controversy because most people believe in what we already have, the traditional interventions other than the Western medication. So I guess America is supposed to do more research into the way of more research in our way of living first before maybe pushing their own agenda.
Is this the last one? The next one?
One more over there, and then we'll have this, and two more.
Two more? Okay, so who has the mic? Yes.
Hello. Yes, I'm from Malawi. I'm a print journalist in that country. I don't know if most of you know that country. As we were coming yesterday, one funny thing is that our instructor told us that Los Angeles has a population of over, is it 18 million? 10 million. So I was telling my colleague that this is equivalent to the population of my country. I was laughing. Okay, the point I wanted to make is, first of all, I want to disagree a bit with my friend who is seated here. Though I'm working in Malawi, but I have a background of Uganda. I was born in that country, but as a law-abiding citizen, I married in Malawi. And the Bible and the Quran say, you will leave your family and unite with your husband and become one. And that's exactly what I did. So I'm in Malawi and that's my country. As journalists, I want to disagree with him on this other point where he said that probably the American media or foreign correspondents in African countries report about the negative. Most of you journalists here will agree with me that what is news? In most cases, news is about the negative. And in our countries, most of us have written about scandals. The negative issues are the ones that hit headlines. But the positive issues are always hidden inside. Do you agree with me? Okay, that was my comment. Now, I want to tell the audience how America is portrayed in my country. In Malawi, I've worked as a journalist for about 7 years. And this is the only country where I started practicing my profession. Actually, being a small country, I think America, to a larger extent, is portrayed in a positive way, especially in terms of aid. Malawi is a poor country. I think it's, if not the 13th or the 10th poorest country in the world, according to the UNDP report. And it depends on foreign aid. And America is the biggest bilateral donor to that country. And America has also assisted that country in a number of ways. And many Malawians have come to this country, not only journalists like us who are on the Maro program. We've had engineers, we've had doctors, and those people form an alumni. Most of them have appeared on TV telling the nation how they have benefited from America. But of course, the American media, just like any other Western media, also has, just also like us, we might have our shortfalls. Some people view it negatively. The most striking moment was during the September 11 attack. Of course, especially the Muslims, maybe had to take it that maybe this is a war against Muslims, but that is just a small community in my country. But the U.S. embassy in that country has tried to really tell the people what the policy about terrorism is all about. And slowly by slowly, the image of America that was misportrayed among the Muslims has started growing slowly by slowly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just like my name is Derek. I'm from Singapore. I'd like to take up the question posed by the lady from NPR about how we view American media. Oh, you're the OA. How we view American media. And I would say that in Singapore, the American media is largely homogenous, and there are two reasons for that. One, on a continual basis, Singaporeans see America through two prisms. One is the cultural prism, films, media, music, sports, and that's the main reason, or one of the main reasons why there's a general positive feeling towards America, because the soft cultural power of America is something that everybody enjoys. The second prism through which people in Singapore view America is through the prism of foreign policy. Simply because being a small country, everything that goes on in the world is important to us, it affects us. And America being the preeminent power in the world, anything that America does overseas affects us. And this is where the negativity comes in. It's not so much negativity about America, because we still love America, but negativity about the American government. And there's the distinction, I think, as far as at least Singapore is concerned, because we don't see how the American public understands what the rest of the world thinks about American policy. This is my concern coming from Singapore. I can understand why the American media might be American-centric, because look at how large this country is. And it's not a homogeneous country, it's a very diverse country with diverse people and diverse, well, two ideologies, more or less. But my concern is that when President Bush comes up in the war on terror and says, the reason why these terrorists are doing what they're doing, or the people who don't like us, and why they don't like us, is because they don't like our freedoms. They don't like our way of life. My concern is if the media doesn't present a counterpoint to that, because it's my personal belief that that is not true, what President Bush said, that is not the reason why people do not like America, because everybody loves, actually, the American way of life. In fact, I would disagree with my friend from Bangladesh. The problem is that America is only America in all its ideals set out in its constitution in America. I know there is this whole debate about the lessening of civil rights, with the war on terror. But the problem that a lot of people in the rest of the world have is that outside of America, these ideals don't apply in the application of foreign policy. So my concern is, does the American media present that counterpoint when your government says something? I don't expect the American media to report extensively about what goes on in the rest of the world, but when your administration picks up on something like this, then do you go to the rest of the world and say, well, this is what they think, and this is what they say, in contrast to what our government says. So that's all I have to say.
Well, I think it's great that we end with a challenge. And I think this has been fascinating for all of us, and including specifically ending with a challenge to us. There were other challenges to us. I think we will never, having free media isn't something, and having excellent media isn't something we arrive at and then never have to struggle for again. It's a continuing struggle, and I think we always have to stay attuned and stay vigilant and continue to challenge ourselves. This has been a wonderful series of challenges, a wonderful discussion. For our guests who are the Murrow Fellows, your program continues, but we are having a reception. Tonight I'll actually see you at the former president's speech at Disney Hall. I'll look forward to seeing you there. And then we're having a reception here at 5 o'clock tomorrow, I believe, in this same room, so we'll get to see you there. And we're trying to work out some final exit session with you also here. I think we have a wonderful few days in store for you. It should be a wonderful experience for all of you. Let me say how much it means to all of us to have you here. To all of you and to the other guests we have here, thank you so much for being part of this forum.